Decision 2010, Before You Vote, is a special election year series brought to you by Leadership Florida, putting Florida first. The Florida Press Association, the trade association for Florida's newspapers, providing communities across Florida with the news and information relevant to their life, with underwriting by Nova Southeastern University, a private not-for-profit research university. The Florida Association of Insurance Agents, your trusted choice. You need an independent insurance agent. The Florida League of Mayors, the trusted voice for our communities. AARP Florida, the power to make it better. The Claude Pepper Center and Foundation, dedicated to enhancing the well-being of Florida seniors and preserving American democracy. Florida Philanthropic Network, building philanthropy to build a better Florida. Now, from the beautiful campus of Nova Southeastern University in Davie, Florida, Decision 2010 Before You Vote presents the candidates for U.S. Senate in Florida. And now, your host, from WFOR-TV CBS 4, Antonio Mora.
Welcome to the debate for the United States Senate. Tonight's event is being broadcast by a number of stations across the state in order to connect with as many voters as possible. The three candidates vying for this Senate seat are Governor Charlie Crist, the independent candidate, United States Representative Kendrick Meek, a Democrat, and the former Speaker of the Florida House, Marco Rubio, a Republican. The candidates will each have 1 minute and 15 seconds to respond to questions, and they will be signaled by a clock located on the stage. Our panel tonight includes William March with the Tampa Tribune, Miriam Marquez with the Miami Herald, and my colleague, CBS 4 political reporter Michael Williams. We have asked the audience to hold its applause and the candidates to follow the guidelines presented to them before this broadcast. Our time is limited and the issues are endless, so we'll get started. Mr. Rubio won the toss to go first. Mr. Crist will go second, followed by Mr. Meek. We will begin with the issue Florida voters care most about, jobs. Our unemployment rate is 2 percentage points higher than the national average. Nearly 1 in 8 Floridians who want to work can't get a job. You opposed the federal stimulus, which by all accounts saved the jobs of firefighters, police officers, and teachers. If we had not had that stimulus money, wouldn't things have been worse? And what would you do differently to make sure that Floridians get jobs?
Well, first of all, thank you tonight for having this debate and all of you for being a part of it. Let's talk about the stimulus package first. It was called stimulus for a reason. It was supposed to stimulate the economy. It has failed to do that. In fact, since the stimulus passed, over 3 million Americans have lost their jobs. Over 200,000 Floridians have lost their jobs. And the unemployment rate, both in Florida and nationally, is substantially higher than it was before it passed. It has failed to do everything it was supposed to do. On the other hand, it has stimulated the national debt to the tune of over $800 billion and climbing, of money that our children and our grandchildren will work their whole life to pay back. There were other alternatives to the stimulus. It wasn't about doing the stimulus or nothing at all. And it begins by acknowledging that jobs are not created by politicians. U.S. senators don't create jobs. Presidents don't create jobs. Jobs are created by everyday people from all walks of life that start a business or expand an existing business. And what we need are leaders in Washington, government leaders, that will create an environment where doing that, where starting a business or expanding an existing business is easier, not harder. That's not what we've gotten. Over the last 18 months, from the stimulus package to the threats of tax increases to Obamacare, everything that has happened over there has made it harder, not easier, for jobs to be created. And that's the most important thing the next U.S. Senator from Florida needs to realize. It distinguishes me from my opponents in this race.
Mr. Crist, as Mr. Rubio points out, the unemployment rate in the state of Florida has soared during your tenure as governor. Why should Florida voters trust you to get them jobs?
Because I think it's very important that the Florida voters understand that this has been a tough 4 years. Probably the toughest 4 years in the history of our state besides the Great Depression as it relates to the economy. It is easy to govern when money is flowing. It is hard to govern when money is tight. It was important, I think, to take the Recovery Act money for one simple reason, because I care about the people of our state. I care about you. Now, if my opponent, Marco Rubio, had been your governor and hadn't taken the stimulus money, 20,000 educators tonight would not be employed. Another 60,000 of our fellow Floridians would not have an income, would not have that paycheck coming to them and their family every week in order to be able to put food on their table. That's unconscionable to me. That's not compassionate. That's dispassionate. I think it's important that we understand what else the stimulus did. People don't talk about it, but it cut $300 billion in tax cuts. That was important for us to remember. And how did it do it? by investing in things that were important to people, like new home buyers. You know, I talk to members that are in the housing industry every day in the Sunshine State, and some homes are starting to sell now because first-time home buyers got that $8,000 tax credit. Other things that the stimulus did was invest in infrastructure.
Thank you.
We all know that if infrastructure is invested in, you get more jobs.
All right, your time. Mr. Meek, you, as opposed to many Democrats in Congress who believe the Bush tax cuts should not expire even for wealthier Americans, including President Obama's former OMB director, budget director, Peter Orszag, who wrote that it would amount to the largest tax increase in American history, and he said no one wants to make an already stagnating job market worse, which is exactly what would happen if the cuts expire as planned. You want those cuts for wealthier Americans to expire. You also have not proposed any cuts in taxes for larger corporations, even though corporate taxes in this country are the highest in the developed world. How will that create jobs for Floridians?
Thank you so very much for the question, and thank you for moderating this debate and the questioners. I'm glad that we're having this debate tonight because it's about the future of this country and also the future of our state. I think it's important when we look at the stimulus, we have to look at it as a tool that set the platform to stop us from going into a depression. When we look at tax cuts, the last debate I talked about, and for those of you who did not see the last debate, Mr. Rubio and Mr. Crist stand side by side in making sure that the special interests and the super wealthy get their tax cut, even those who ship jobs overseas. I pointed out the fact that middle-class families under the income of $250,000 would have to pay $6,000 a year on that particular tax cut for those Floridians or for those Americans to get a tax cut. So I'm for middle-class tax cuts. I'm for child credits. I'm for tax cuts that are going to help people get back on their feet. What they're advocating is tax cuts for the super wealthy and those that are privileged in this country that did not ask for a tax cut in the beginning. We had a different economic time during the time those tax cuts were given. Now we're in a super deficit, and they believe in trickle-down economics that did not work when it was first introduced and will not work now. I'm protecting those that work hard for their money every day.
Thank you, Mr. Meek. Next question from Michael Williams.
Turning to the federal deficit, nonpartisan economists argue that to avoid medium or long-term federal bankruptcy, either taxes must be raised on all Americans or huge entitlement reforms must beginning with Social Security. My question to you, when we hear more and more that anything else is a political lie, is simply this. Beginning with you, Mr. Crist. Facing that stark choice, do you raise taxes if it comes down to that choice or begin to cut benefits, and if so, precisely where and how?
I think you do what we've done in Florida. Now is the time to cut taxes. This is where the Speaker and I agree. We have to cut taxes to put more of your hard-earned money into your pocket. And we have to do it for small businesses, too. These aren't the wealthy. These are the entrepreneurs that make a difference and hire people and create jobs throughout our state and our country. I think it's important to have those tax cuts come about, make sure that we have them going forward, make sure that you have more of your hard-earned dollars in your pocket, instead of having government spend that money in a way that probably is not in your best interest and probably wasteful.
Mr. Crist, specifically to the question, either the choice economists argue is to raise taxes eventually or cut benefits. Given that choice, first and foremost, which is your choice? Cut Social Security benefits or raise taxes to cover those benefits for Floridians?
Neither one, and I mean to be blunt here. That's a false choice. I think what we have to do is be smart and be prudent and protect our seniors. This is an issue in this campaign. You know, my Republican opponent, Marco Rubio, talks about raising the age of eligibility or privatizing Social Security. That's not what our seniors deserve or want or should have. It's a promise that was made to them, and I'm the only one in this election who has said that if elected your next U.S. Senator, to our senior citizens, I'm talking to you tonight, I will protect and preserve Social Security as we know it today, because it was a promise that was made to you. Once we get through this difficult time, we can do what we did in Florida. I'm a fiscal conservative. I slashed the Florida budget more than any governor in the history of the state by $7.4 billion. And we did it, Mike, without hurting education, without hurting seniors, without hurting health care. We did it by being smart, by being targeted, and doing the way I would want to do it in Washington if I have the honor of your vote.
Mr. Meek? Even leading House Democrats this year, beginning with Steny Hoyer from Maryland, a powerful House Democrat, acknowledged earlier in the year that we would have to put everything on the table eventually, including Social Security. You, like the governor, have not talked much about those tough choices. You've said preserve it, but specifically to the point. If it comes down to having to raise taxes, as economists say we'll have to do, or cut Social Security benefits, which is your choice? And if you cut or change benefits precisely, how do you do it? How do you answer that question after now running for this office for the past nearly 2 years?
Well, you know I've been around the longest, so I'll put it this way. I think it's very, very important to pay attention to what the governor just said. He said very little. He said what we've been hearing all through the years, through Washington, D.C., let's cut taxes, and everything will work out. Well, let me just tell you something. When it comes down to these entitlement programs, we have to be able to weed out the waste. And when we look at the health care legislation that was just passed, we spend more for health care, but we're not healthier because of it. It's the second largest deficit reduction legislation that has been passed in the Congress in several years. Charlie Crist wants to repeal it. Marco Rubio wants to repeal it. It's very, very important to know that we have to make tough decisions. Now, when it comes down to dealing with this issue on how we get there rolling up our sleeves, making sure that we work on the issues that are facing this country. The very tax cut that the governor and Marco is talking about are tax cuts that are going to take this country into a deeper hole. $700 billion for the super wealthy in this country will bring about the fall of many of these programs if we don't make tough decisions. The next senator of Florida, a couple more seconds. The next senator of Florida must be a protector, not of the special interests, but of the people of this state and the country.
I'm not hearing from either one of you what's going to happen to Social Security when we know that full benefits won't be able to be paid out in 2037. So neither of you is proposing any specific solution about changing the age of eligibility or about changing the formula for benefits for anyone.
Since we have, you can take the governor in order, and
sure. We'll go. With all due respect, report after report does indicate what you just said, and that's important for people to hear. Reports indicate that Social Security is solvent until at least 2037 or 2041. Yet there are people like Marco Rubio who want to tinker with it. It doesn't make sense. It's one of the few programs in Washington, D.C. that actually works. And typical of Washington, D.C., it's what politicians attack.
But it seems like it won't work in barely more than a generation, Mr. Meek.
Let me just say that it's important that we expand middle-class jobs. It goes down to the tax policy. Both of these gentlemen want to give tax cuts to companies that ship jobs overseas. I want to give tax cuts to companies that stay here. Expanding the middle-class workforce in Florida will help the Social Security Trust Fund. I think it's very, very important. I think when you look at this issue, and 40% of Floridians will go into poverty without Social Security. I said once before, and I'll say it again. If someone wants to change Social Security, they're going to have to go through me. The bottom line is I take my orders from the people that I represent and the people that sign petitions to place me on the ballot and those that will vote for me to protect them and not the special interests.
Mr. Rubio, we've yet from either candidate heard hard specifics after this long campaign. Let me also put the question to you. You have been assailed for saying that we will need to look at entitlement reform over the long term and have said before in interviews that anything less is, you haven't used the word a political lie, but is simply someone wanting to be elected to office. What specifically do you propose? Higher taxes or begin to make reforms? And precisely what are the tough reforms you are willing to begin considering making?
Michael, first of all, I'd ask for your indulgence for a little extra time because I have to both set the record straight and answer your question since I haven't spoken in a while. Let me set the record straight first. The governor has repeated something that is now an old political trick in America, and that is let's go out and scare seniors about Social Security. Here are the facts about where I stand on Social Security. If you're over the age of 55, if you're a current beneficiary or about to retire, I do not believe there should be any changes to Social Security for you. There's a lot of reasons why I feel that way, but one of them is sitting in the audience today. It's my mom who turns 80 years old 2 weeks from today. Social Security is the sole source of income that she has. She depends on it. I would never support any changes to Social Security that would adversely impact her or people in her demographic. Now, what you haven't heard today from any of these two candidates here on the stage is a real plan to solve Social Security. What you've heard from Governor Crist is that there are no problems with Social Security. That's just not true. The fact of the matter is that for years now, Congress has been raiding the Social Security Trust Fund. Any money that's left over after they pay out benefits, they take it. And they used to pay for all sorts of things. Republicans and Democrats have done it. And the fact is that by year 2037, let me tell you what the year 2037 is. That's the year my daughter turns pretty much my age. It's not that far away. And the closer we get to that year, the harder it is to solve these problems. So here's what I've said we need to do. Younger workers, younger people like myself, people 20, 30, 40 years from retirement, need to understand that we're going to have to discuss different options on the table. Whether it's extending the retirement age, as it's happening now, again, for younger workers. Whether it's looking at indexing, again, for younger workers. Not for people that are on the system today. Unfortunately.
Indexing meaning precisely
the way the initial benefit is set. To a progressive price index or something like it. Again, these are options. You know, the Congressional Budget Office has issued 30-some-odd recommendations. Amnesty for illegal aliens, which is Governor Crist's plan, which, by the way, during one of the last debates, he said Robert Reich, the former Labor Secretary under Bill Clinton, supported his plan. Someone needs to tell Robert Reich, because he says he's never heard of it. Right. And in fact, he thinks your plan, Governor, makes it worse, not better.
We'll move on to Miriam Marcus of the Miami Herald.